Chapter 8: Fog and Singing. Izzi woke to a cold stone at her back and a sky the color of ash. The fire had died to a smear of charcoal, its last heat bled into the rock. Someone, Sirius, had left a stub of torch wedged in a crack, its little flame guttering, just enough to keep the dark from swallowing the alcove whole. Pain arrived with her first full breath, a band of knives cinched tight around her ribs. She gritted her teeth, sucked air slow through her nose, and pushed herself upright. The blanket slid. Fresh linen bound her from collarbone to waist, already pink where blood had pressed through. Her clothes were a rumpled heap behind her, damp with old rain and iron. Outside, the storm had passed. No rain, no thunder, only a thick, wet fog drawn low across the mountains, muting the world to a soft hush. She stood, one arm clamping her ribs, the other balancing on the stone. The bandages needed changing, she wasn't in shape to try. A smell caught then, faint at first, then insistently worse. Sweet sour rot, old meat. It seeped from the back of the alcove, from the dark the torch couldn't reach. "I don't need this," she muttered, and went anyway. Each step made the stench swell. The torch in her hand threw a short, jittering halo, beyond it shapes. In a quick lift of flame she saw them clearly. Heaped bones, snapped and gnawed, half-eaten torsos, the slump of arms and legs stripped to sinew, a mountain of what was left behind. Her stomach lurched. She stumbled backward, banged her hip on the rock, and forced herself toward the opening. Cool fog kissed her face. She gulped it like water and half ran, half hobbled out into the broom. "Sirius?" she called, voice too thin to carry. The ache in her chest spiked and stole the rest. Something else answered. A sound braided through the fog, first a thread, then a ribbon. A woman's voice, distant and clear as a bell struck underwater. It wound between the pines and over stone, sorrow and sweetness folded together, the kind of tune you follow without meaning to. Izzi's ears flared, every hair along her arms rising. She felt the pain dull under it, felt the tug, not in her muscles but in the center of her. "Come," the song said, "come and be held, come and be unburdened." "Beautiful," she breathed, barely aware she'd said it. She followed. Fog clung to her ankles, moss slicked the stones. The song swelled. Ahead, a creek cut the slope, its water black and silver. On a flat rock by the bank sat a woman, naked save for the river's sheen and a curtain of long brown hair that poured down her back, veiling her breasts as if by design. She sang without effort, throat open, head tilted so the song could pour clean into the morning. Izzi drifted closer, the torch sagging in her hand. The woman turned, smile soft, arms opening in welcome. Safety poured off her like heat. Pain belonged to someone else. Izzi stepped onto the slick stone, reached out. The girl's jaw split. It unfurled like a hinge, doubling wide, cheeks tearing into a rictus that showed rows of crooked teeth, jagged and hungry. The song didn't stop. It twisted, slipped sharper, a blade in velvet. The thing lunged for Izzi's throat. Steel flashed. Sirius came out of the fog behind it, a blur of black cloth and pale rune. His hand clamped the creature's hair, yanking its head back. His dagger punched clean into the soft of its throat. No flourish. No sound but a wet, startled gurgle. He ripped the blade sideways, let the body crumple into the creek where the current took the blood in a widening curl. The song died. The world slammed back. Pain returned like a hammer. Izzi dropped to her knees on the wet stone and braced herself, the torch clattering into the moss. Breath came ragged, the creek hissed past, indifferent. She looked up. The siren's face lay half submerged, that beautiful mask ruined by its own teeth. Sirius wiped his dagger on the thing's hair, eyes on Izzi. "I told you," he said, voice flat as the rock. "They'll eat anyone who doesn't know what they're doing." She would have laughed if it didn't hurt. Instead, she winced and managed. Lovely timing. He sheathed the blade without ceremony, stepped into her space and lifted her, one arm behind her shoulders, the other under her knees. Heat rushed to her cheeks despite the cold. He didn't look at her, his gaze flicked once over the fog, measuring, then back toward the alcove. "Clothes," he said simply. He carried her up to the shelter, set her down with care, and turned his back while she dragged the blood-damp garments on under the blanket's cover, every movement a flare of fire along her ribs. When she was done, he crouched and offered his forearms. She looped her arms over his shoulders, felt the knit of bandage beneath his sleeve, the steady strength that made lifting her seem nothing at all. They left the alcove behind, the torch snuffed, the pile of bones swallowed by the fog. Sirius picked his way down the slope as if he knew every slick stone, every broken root, the weight of her never breaking his rhythm. The mist thinned the farther they went. Somewhere below, a village waited, and questions sharper than any claw. Izzi pressed her forehead to his shoulder to keep the world from spinning, breath hot against his collar. He didn't speak, neither did she. Sirius came out of the fog with Izzi in his arms and a ribbon of blood pattering from her torn tunic to the cobbles. The town had shaken off the storm, but not its fear. Doors were cracked, not opened. Faces leaned out only as far as caution allowed. "Gods!" someone breathed near the well. "The griffin's taken another voice said, half gasp, half prayer. "Look at her! Poor thing! Get the healer!" Sirius didn't slow. His jaw was set, eyes forward, footfalls hard enough to echo. The smear of red trailed behind them, thin and steady. A dog slunk out, sniffed at the copper in the air, and whined as he passed. A boy reached to follow and was snatched back by a mother's hand. The inn's lanterns burned warmer than the street. The moment he crossed the threshold, the keeper at the desk, sharp-eyed, gray-plated, looked from Izzi's face to Sirius's and back again. The ledger's quill stopped mid-scratch. "Room," Sirius said, already moving for the stairs. "And your healer." She didn't argue. The chair scraped back, skirts snapped. "Emil! Run, fetch Master Den!" Her voice blurred down the hall as she vanished, the door banging in her wake. Sirius shouldered open the door to his room and laid Izzi on the bed. She was dead weight and heat, breath ragged and shallow. Her lashes fluttered. Broken words spilled out in a fevered whisper, names and not names tangled in pain. He slid a pillow beneath her head and bent to the buckles of her leathers with quick, practiced fingers. "Easy," he muttered to no one. "Easy." The straps gave. He peeled back stiffened cloth, then the tunic beneath, careful to keep what modesty he could. The bandages he'd wrapped on the mountain were soaked through along her right side. He worked the linen free. The breath caught in his throat before he could stop it. From collarbone to hip, her ribs were one vast bruise, livid and blackening at the edges, the color of thunderheads. Fine cuts laddered her flank and stomach. A deeper gash along the lower ribs seeped, stubborn as the woman herself. Both arms were mottled with impact, but they bent as they should. A miracle, he thought. Then a bitter aftertaste, should have come sooner. He set his pack beside her and rolled his sleeves. A vial uncorked, the clean sting of strong spirit. A twist of cloth, a needle and thread drawn through a waxed pouch. He cleaned every cut until she hissed even in sleep, then stitched the worst with hands steady as a surgeon's. In, out, tie, in, out, tie. He crushed a measure of dried comfrey and yarrow between his palms, mixed it with salve in a small tin, and pressed the paste into the cleaned wounds. New bandages went on snug and sure, white over the map of purple blooming beneath. He checked the wrap with 2 fingers under the edge until the pressure was firm but not cruel. When he was done, he dipped a cloth in cool water and wrung it until it stopped dripping. He laid it across her brow, her breath evened a fraction. The tightness in his chest loosened not at all. "So stubborn," he said softly, sitting back on his heels. "Too stubborn to die." He pulled the blanket up to her waist, leaving the clean bandages to breathe, and rose as footsteps ran hard down the corridor. The door opened without knocking. A man in a wool coat, hair white, eyes needle bright, stepped in with a leather case and the innkeeper at his shoulder. "Master Den?" Sirius said. "Found her on the mountain. Fell from a high place." The healer went to the bedside without ceremony. His hands were quick but not unkind. 2 fingers to the pulse at Izzi's throat, ear to her ribs, a gentle press along bruised bone. He lifted the edge of Sirius's work, peered at the stitches, and made a small sound in his throat. "You do this?" he asked without looking away. "Yes. It shows." Den straightened, nodded once. "Clean lines, right depth. You've a talent for the ugly parts." He snapped open his case, brought out a crock and a folded packet of leaves. "I can ease the hurt, help the bruising break up. Nothing's broken that I can feel. Saints favor her. Falls like that don't often spare the inside." He set the packet on the bedside table. "Steep this when she wakes. Sip, not gulp. Ointment for the bruises, 2 fingers' breadth, morning and night." He paused, studying Sirius with a speculative tilt. "If you're staying, I could put you to work. We're short a second pair of hands. You stitch like a man who's done it too often to be bad at it." "No," Sirius said, not unkindly. "I won't be here long. Shame." Den closed his case. "Then she's in your keeping tonight. I'll return at first light." He glanced to the innkeeper. "Broth when she can take it. Water, small sips." The keeper bobbed her head. "Aye." At the door, Den looked back once more at Izzi's sleeping face, at the clean bandages and the map of storm-dark bruises framing them. "A miracle," he said simply. "Try not to waste it." They left. The latch clicked. Silence gathered, a thin, late-hour quiet, all the town's worries damped but not gone. Sirius took the chair by the bed and folded his bandaged forearm against his ribs. Izzi mumbled once, turned her face to the cool cloth and stilled. He waited. The room smelled of spirit, crushed herb, and rain. Outside, somewhere far below, a dog barked its single warning at the dark and fell quiet again. He watched the rise and fall of her chest, watched the pulse in her throat, watched until the muscles in his jaw ached from holding. "Too stubborn," he said again, softer, as if the words were a charm that might keep her tethered. And he kept his seat. Sirius scrubbed at the pump behind the inn until the water ran pink, then pale, then clear. The cold bit his skin. His knuckles were already split, the bandage on his forearm wet through along one edge. He turned his hands under the stream until the sting brought him back into himself, then shook them dry and stared a moment at the dark crescents of blood beneath his nails. The stink of sirens still clung in the memory, river-cold flesh, metallic breath. Inside, the taproom held the late hush of a town that sleeps in fear, low fire, a few men hunched over cups, the clink of glass softened by nerves. Sirius took a stool at the bar and lifted 2 fingers without looking up. "Something strong," he said. The innkeep slid a squat bottle and a clean glass across to him. He poured, swallowed, felt the heat move down like coals. The second went down slower. His green eyes were tired, rimmed red, the lids heavy enough to make a scowl out of neutral silence. The door banged wide. "An elf?" Horian's voice burst into the quiet like a thrown chair. He was all wind and mud and fury, hair wild, eyes bright, chest heaving as he strode straight to the desk. "I heard, townsfolk said, a female elf was carried in." "Where?" The innkeep's head snapped up, then sideways to the bar, then back. "Aye," she said, voice low to damp the blast of him. "Upstairs. The hunter brought her. Master Den." Horian was already swinging, scanning the room with a predator's quick sweep. He found Sirius at the bar and his mouth pulled into a blade-thin line. "You," he said. Sirius didn't turn. He lifted the glass, swallowed the last of it, and set it down with a quiet click. "Me." Horian took 2 long strides and stopped close enough for Sirius to smell salt and bear on him. "Where is she?" "Sleeping," Sirius said. "Healer's orders." "What happened?" Horian's voice had dropped, but the thunder was still in it. "They said you carried her in." "From where? What did you do?" "Saved her life." Sirius finally turned, meeting the big man's glare without a blink. "Where were you?" Horian's jaw worked. For a heartbeat, something like gratitude flickered, and then pride shoved it down. "Take me to her." "No." The word landed like a thrown coin on stone. A few heads turned. The innkeep froze with a cloth in her hands. "Say that again," Horian said, very softly. Sirius's expression didn't change. "You'll wake her. She needs quiet, not your shouting. One of you goes up and sits with her. The other waits here and stays out of the way." He slid the empty glass back toward the bottle. "Pick which." Horian's hands curled and uncurled. For a long breath, he looked like a man deciding between a punch and a swallow. The swallow won, barely. He blew out air through his nose, dragged a palm over his face, and some of the wildness bled off. "Fine," he said, voice rough. "Kaylin's still out looking. I'll sit." Sirius stood, the stool rasping back. "Quietly," he said, and left the bottle where it was. They climbed the stairs with Horian's fury tamped down to a tight, vibrating wire. At the door, Sirius paused, a hand on the latch. "She's bandaged," he said. "Flat warning, not apology. Don't go fussing at her wraps. Don't wake her to prove you care." Horian swallowed hard, nodded once. "Open the door." Sirius did. Inside, the room held the soft rasp of Izzi's breath. Izzi lay on the bed, bandages stark white against bruised skin, her breath shallow but steady. A damp cloth rested across her brow. The lamplight was low, the air thick with the sharp bite of spirit and crushed herbs. Horian froze in the doorway, the breath leaving him in one heavy gust. "Saints," he whispered. Relief cracked through his booming voice, leaving something rawer behind. "She's alive. She needs rest," Sirius said. Horian nodded, eyes fixed on Izzi. "Will you be near?" "Downstairs," Sirius replied. "Good." Horian lingered a moment longer, then turned back to the hall. Kaylin's still out searching. I'll go find him, tell him she's safe. He paused. Thank you, he said. He left at a run, boots thundering down the stairwell, the sound fading into the inn's quiet. Sirius stayed a moment longer in the doorway, watching the elf's steady rise and fall beneath the bandages, before pulling the latch shut and returning to the bar. Sirius stood posted at Izzi's door with a bottle loose in his hand. He had drunk enough to fell a lesser man. On him it laid like a second coat, quieting the edges, not the stance. He listened to the inn breathe, the low fire, the distant clink of crockery, the echo of his own pulse. Footfalls pounded the stairs. Horian rounded the corner first, Kaylin a heartbeat behind, face drawn tight, hair damp with sweat. Sirius straightened. Healer says she's stable, nothing broken. She needs dark and quiet. One person in at a time, water in small sips when she wakes. Don't touch the bandages. His voice was flat, the words clean despite the bottle. Kaylin didn't wait for more. He shouldered past, Sirius yielding a half step with the lazy sway of a man who'd let the drink loosen his hinge. For an instant his expression slipped. Something tired, something older, then it sealed again. Horian's big hand landed on Sirius's shoulder, a firm pat that grounded the corridor. Really, thank you, man. The bluster was gone, what was left was plain. Sirius gave the smallest nod and turned down the hall, the bottle tapping his thigh as he went. Kaylin eased the latch, slid into the room, and closed the door soft. He set his greatsword down along the wall, the steel kissing the floorboards with a careful scrape. The lamplight was low, the air sharp with spirit and herb. Izzi lay still beneath the blanket, the white of her fresh wraps stark against the bloom of bruises. He pulled the chair to the left side of the bed and sat. For a long moment he only watched her, counting the rise and fall, chasing each breath to the end as if it might be the last. "Iz," he whispered. The word cracked. He reached and took her hand, rough fingers swallowing her smaller ones. Thank the heavens. Silence pressed close. Kaylin bent his head, shoulders bowing as if under a new blade. "I'm sorry," he murmured, voice fraying to thread. "I let this happen. I should've—" The rest broke apart. He swallowed hard and tightened his grip, as if he could anchor her there by will alone. The room held his quiet sobbing, small, shuddering sounds that didn't fit a man his size, until even those settled into breath. Outside, the inn creaked and the town slept, and Kaylin kept his vigil on the left side of the bed, her hand in his, eyes fixed on the life he refused to lose. Rain had returned by the time Sirius stepped out of the inn. It ran off the eaves in silver cords, beating along the edge of his jaw, soaking his shirt in a breath. He tipped his head back to the bruised sky, eyes shut as if he could drown the last hours out of himself. Still more to do, he murmured, and turned toward the mountain. A fortnight fell away in slow shreds. Izzi rose and sank through it, surfacing into brief, fever-bright moments and then slipping under again. In the dim lamplight she muttered names like loose beads. Kaylin's, once Horian's, twice Sirius's, and, once, Celine's, like touching a blade by accident. Hands cooled her brow. Water came to her lips in careful sips. The inn breathed around her, the nap of linen, the sting of crushed herbs, footfalls that halted outside her door and moved on. Sometimes Horian snored on the floor, a mountain of blanket and boots. Sometimes Kaylin sat in the chair, unblinking, a stone carving of a man with a sword propped nearby and a prayer gritted between his teeth. On the 15th morning, fog thinned to bare light, and Izzi opened her eyes and kept them open. Kaylin was there, exactly where she'd last seen him in the steady hours, left side of the bed, elbows on knees, hands clasped until the knuckles blanched. Horian had succumbed to sleep on the floor, one arm flung across his face, mouth open in a most undignified gape. "She's awake," Kaylin said, the words half exhale, half marvel. He leaned forward, and for the first time in days, a smile cracked the hard line of his mouth. Izzi blinked against the grain of light and tried to sit. Pain flared. She sank back with a hiss. "What happened? I remember." She searched her memory, found fog and a creak and a voice, and a hand catching a monster by the hair. Sirius, the siren. He saved me. Kaylin's brows lifted. "He did more than carry you inside then." Surprise tugged at his voice despite himself. "He patched me," she said, glancing down at the fresh wraps. "Twice, I think. And it wasn't a griffin pulling folk from the trail. Sirens, calling them to the water and eating them." She swallowed, the taste of river copper still somewhere in her throat. There was a pile in the alcove. Kaelin's gaze tightened with anger that wasn't for her. He nodded once. Horian found signs downriver. Bones in the reeds. On the floor, Horian snorted awake like a kicked mule, flailed, saw her eyes, and came upright in a tangle of blanket. "The elf lives," he boomed, then winced and dropped to a whisper. "The elf lives." Izzi managed a thin smile. "Guess we didn't get that score then," she rasped, trying to tip the room back toward light with the old habit of a joke. Horian rubbed his face, hair a catastrophe, and huffed. "Score's complicated," he said, then sighed. "Chief wouldn't hear siren if you carved it into his door. He wanted a griffin to blame and a griffin to bury." He spread his hands. "We gave him the fledgling Kaelin brought down as a token of good faith. That, and the fact no one's gone missing since, soothed him. Trade wagons are moving again." Izzi frowned. "So, the bounty?" Horian's grin flashed, softer than usual. He reached under the chair and thunked a heavy purse onto the table. "Oh, the bounty he paid. The chief was sure we ended it when we handed him the fledgling." He pushed the purse toward Kaelin with 2 fingers. "And I'm not modest, but I am fair. It's yours. Yours and Izzi's. I kept enough back for rooms and food and a decent bottle that I already killed." Kaelin blinked. "Horian, don't start," Horian said, and for once there was no swagger in it. "You two earned it. I swung hard, aye, but you did the bleeding." Silence held a heartbeat, then Izzi let out a breath that almost felt like laughter. It hurt, she didn't care. "Is Sirius still here?" she asked, and tried to make it sound like idle curiosity. Kaelin shook his head. "Haven't left your side," which was both answer and apology. Horian rolled his shoulders, the old grin creeping back to life. "Haven't seen him in a few days. Before that, just at the bar most nights. Says 3 words when pressed and none of them friendly." Izzi stared at the ceiling a moment, hearing rain that wasn't there, a song that was long dead. The bandages held her tight. The ache reminded her that she still belonged to the world. Horian cut her a look that said he understood anyway. Kaelin squeezed her fingers, careful of the bruises. The inn breathed. Outside, wheels clattered over cobbles and a hawker called his wares, and the town remembered how to be a town again. The days that followed folded one atop the other, slow as cards turned by a tired hand. Izzi slept, woke, sipped what the healer left, drifted again. Between dreams, she found her mind circling the same orbit. Green eyes rimmed with exhaustion, a mouth that never quite chose a smile, a bandaged arm steadying a knife. Why leave without a word, she wondered, and then flushed, annoyed at herself for thinking of his face long enough to feel heat bloom in her cheeks. Mystery should have made her wary. Instead it tugged like a thread she couldn't stop worrying. On the 3rd morning, Kaelin shoulder-barged the door with a tray, the smell of porridge and fried bread haloing him. "Think you'll be able to walk today?" he asked, setting the tray near her knee. "Traders are heading back to Cerulea's Rest. We can take a boat from there to the mainland. Horian says Hesta will keep us until you're fully mended." Izzi levered herself upright, teeth clenched until the room steadied. "It'll be fine," she said, which wasn't true and didn't need to be. She eased her feet to the floor, tested weight. Her ribs burned for a few breaths and settled to a dull roar. "He just left," she added before she could stop herself. Kaelin set the cup in her hand. "Some men make noise when they go, some don't," he said simply. They met the caravan at the town's gate, 2 wagons rattling with crates and jars, oxen chewing their bits as if nothing in the world could ever be urgent. Horian bounced onto the tailboard with a flourish and offered it to Izzi like a stage. "Your chariot, my lady," he boomed, then, seeing her flinch on the first jolt, softened. "We'll take the back corner. Less rattle." The road did not agree. Every rut found her ribs, every stone tapped the bruise along her side as if testing for a hollow. She breathed through it, knuckles white on the rail, while Kaelin set himself to her windward, and Horian wove stories large enough to distract a small army. When the pain peaked, she stared at the line where the sky met the land and counted to 100, then started again. By late daylight, the air salted. The road tipped toward the sea and the world opened. Cerulea's Rest spread below like a painting finally unrolled, bluest waters you'll ever see, white sand smudged gold by evening, gulls stitching lazy hems across a rose-washed sky. Izzi's breath left her in a sound that might have been a laugh. The azure lanterns had already been lit, beads of honey fire along its balcony. Hesta spotted them from the steps and flourished a towel like a battle standard. Back in one piece? Mostly, she called, eyes flicking to Izzi with brisk concern. Rooms are ready, stew's on. And if you lot have brought trouble, leave it on the beach. Never, Horian lied, hand to heart. They climbed the steps. Izzi reached for the inn door, bracing her shoulder against the frame to keep from leaning to her sore side, and nearly collided as it swung inward. Sirius stepped out into the last light. He checked short with the instinct of a man who lives on edges, the bottle he carried tilting, green eyes snapping up. They were close enough that Izzi saw the pale seam of a healing cut high at his temple, the damp at the cuff where rain had caught him again, the faint dark of stubble roughening his jaw. For a half-breath, none of them moved. Izzi half leaning on the door, Horian stalled mid-quip behind her, Kaylin's hand hovering near her elbow out of habit. Sirius's gaze flicked over her, bandages beneath clean tunic, careful stance, color in her face, and something cooled in his shoulders, as if he set down an invisible weight. Careful, he said quietly, stepping aside to let her pass. Izzi's mouth had a dozen replies and chose none. She swallowed, found her balance, and slipped by. The salt evening breathed between them. The lantern over the lintel threw a coin of warm light across his cheekbone. Welcome back, Hesta chirped from behind the counter, blissfully unaware of the taut wire strung in the doorway. I'll get your keys. Thank you, Kaylin managed, the word hollow and real at once. Sirius shifted as if to go, the bottle tucked loose against his hip. He glanced to Kaylin, then to Horian, then back to Izzi, one heartbeat more than politeness required, and stepped down into the falling night. The sea took him in 3 strides, the dark swallowing the line of his shoulders. Izzi stood with her hand still on the door, ribs aching, pulse high as surf. She hated the way heat climbed her ears again. Horian opened his mouth to say something outrageous, and perhaps sensing the shape of her silence, closed it with a click instead. Upstairs, Kaylin said gently. Izzi nodded. She didn't look back until she reached the landing, and when she did, the street was empty, the last of the evening washed in blue. Only the ribbon of sea remained, whispering like a secret she wasn't yet ready to understand. Hesta leaned over the counter as the door swung shut behind Sirius, brows lifted. You 3 know the half-elf who just walked out? Kaylin angled his greatsword to rest it, eyes still on the doorway. Hunter. Keeps to himself, useful in a pinch, not much for manners. Horian snorted. Broody as a thunderhead, talks like every word costs coin. Rude, but he carried our girl out of death's pocket, so I'll drink to him. Both sets of eyes slid to Izzi. She set her palm on the desk to steady her ribs. He saved my life, she said, quiet but sure. Patched me up twice. He's not what he looks like from across a room. A beat. There's more to him. Oh ho. Hesta's smile went fox sharp. Sounds like somebody's gotten a bit interested. Heat snapped up Izzi's ears. That's not. She bit it off, forced a breath, kept her gaze level. I'm saying he's complicated. More to him. Hesta's chuckle was gentler than her words. She slid 3 keys across the polished wood. He's been here a few days, takes a bottle down to the beach at dusk and stares at the ocean like it owes him an answer. Pays on time, says little, eyes like someone who's walked too far. Horian wagged his brows at Izzi. Kaylin gave him a look that cut it short. 3rd floor, Hesta went on, tapping the keys. Seaside, stew's keeping warm. If you see trouble, leave it on the sand, house rules. Understood, Kaylin said, gathering the keys. Izzi risked one glance back through the doorway to the street washed in blue. The beach lay empty from here, only the surf moving, endless, patient. She swallowed whatever answer her heartbeat was trying to give her and followed the others up the stairs, Hesta's teasing and the hush of the ocean trailing after her like twin threads she couldn't quite untangle. They took their keys and drifted apart down the hall. Horian paused at his door, spread his arms to the corridor like a man greeting a stage. Home, he sighed, all grin and relief. If anyone needs me, I'll be scandalizing a pillow. He vanished with a whistle and the soft thud of boots tossed toward a wall. Kaylin walked Izzi to her room. His hand hovered, not quite touching her elbow. You need anything? She shook her head. No. Sleep. Maybe. He searched her face, read the lie, and let it stand. Good night, Iz. Good night, Kaylin. Inside, the room smelled faintly of salt and soap. On the chair lay the outfit Horian had arranged for her the last time, a soft, low-cut top that left a ribbon of midriff bare, a silk wrap skirt that fell like water, a light shawl for modesty if she wanted it. Izzi stood over the bundle a long moment, thumb worrying the edge of the fabric. A beautiful, bruised, bandaged mess. she muttered, and set about becoming it. She moved carefully, fresh linen across her ribs, clean tunic swapped for the soft top that didn't bite her wraps. The skirt tied at her hip, the tassel swaying. She left the shawl loose over her shoulders, more gesture than cover. In the mirror, her ears were still a little pink from the climb and the stairs and something she refused to name. She huffed a breath at her reflection, half laugh, half dare. Downstairs, Hesta clocked the outfit and said nothing, only lifted a brow and slid a bottle and 2 cups across the counter as if that had been the ask. "For the pain," she said, amused and kind in equal parts. Izzi took the bottle and 1 cup. "I'll return the other when I'm braver." "Leave it on the sand," Hesta called, smile tucked in the words. Outside, night had painted the bay in indigo. Lanterns threw gold coins across the tide. The surf breathed in and out, patient as a sleeping thing. She kicked off her sandals at the stairs and let the cool water kiss her toes, then her ankles. The ache in her ribs flared and settled. She let the bottle dangle from her fingers and followed the curve of shoreline where the beach darkened and the music from the square softened to a hum. He was there. Sirius stood ankle-deep at the tide line, a dark shape against the pearl sheen of waves. A bottle sat in the sand by his heel, unopened. He watched the horizon with the stillness of someone waiting for an answer that might never come. Izzi's steps scuffed lightly. His head turned a fraction, enough to show he'd heard her long before she decided to be heard. His gaze dipped once, taking in the bandages peeking white above her top, the careful way she carried herself. He didn't comment. "You shouldn't be out," he said, voice low enough to be mistaken for the sea. "Everyone keeps saying that," she answered, waiting until the water lapped at her ankles beside him. "I'm tired of being right where I should be." For a few breaths they listened to the water unspool. Far out, a lantern on a fishing skiff bobbed and drifted like a small, stubborn star. "Thank you," she said finally. She didn't dress it up. "For the mountain, for the stitches, for the creek." He didn't look at her. "You're welcome." "You left," she said, without a word. Sirius didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, the line where sea and sky bled together into gray. Izzi leaned forward a little, trying to catch his eyes. When she did, the weight in them startled her. Not sharp or cold this time, but tired, hollow, almost yearning. For a heartbeat, it seemed like he might step forward into the surf and let the ocean take him. She noticed, felt the prickle of it along her skin, and chose not to press. Instead, she gestured vaguely at the waves, the days that had spilled and blurred together. "I've been thinking about why you would help me just to vanish." "I told you," he said. "I don't know." "Liar." It came out gentler than she meant. He glanced over, her mouth curved. "Maybe you don't want to know." The tide crept up, cooled their ankles. He bent, picked up his bottle, opened it with a flick. "Maybe," he allowed, a ghost of amusement in the word. He took a small swallow and set it down again untouched. She studied his profile, cut clean by lantern light, rhymed in salt air, tired to the bone. "Hesta says you stare at the ocean like it owes you an answer." "It does," he said. "And does it pay its debts?" "Not tonight." They stood with that. A gull called once and went quiet. The waves feathered and fell. When she shifted, pain stabbed sharp, and the breath she sucked set her whole side aflame. He noticed the flinch without looking. "You should go in, I know." She rolled her eyes, then offered her hand. "Walk me to the steps, then vanish as you please." He didn't take the hand, exactly. He offered an arm, solid and unshowy. She slid her fingers into the crook of his elbow, let him set an easy pace along the damp sand. At the bottom of the inn's stairs he stopped, the lantern above humming with moths. "Go rest," he said. "Bossy," she murmured, and released his arm. Izzi lingered, her hand still light on his arm. "How long will you be staying in Cerulea's Rest?" He glanced at her, then back toward the darkened curve of the beach. "A few days," he said, the words quiet but certain, like a promise he wasn't sure why he was making. She nodded, satisfied enough to let go. "Good night, Izzi." Her name in his mouth did something to her ears she pretended the wind had managed. "Good night, Sirius." He turned and started down the beach, shadows stretching thin along the foam. Impulsively, she called, "Sirius!" He stopped, turned, his face dim in the lantern light. She tossed him a small leather pouch, all her coin from the hunt. He caught it easily, the coins inside clinking against his palm. "Your share," she said, smiling faintly before stepping back into the inn. For a moment he stood there, weighing the pouch in his hand as though it were heavier than gold. Then he slipped it away, turned toward the surf, and disappeared again into the night. Izzi slipped back into the inn, the door shutting soft behind her. The hush of the taproom was broken only by the creak of a stool as Hesta leaned forward on her elbows, grin wide and waiting. "Well?" Hesta sing-songed. Details, girl? Izzi froze mid-step, heat climbing her ears again. There aren't any, she said quickly, clutching the bottle tighter at her side. Hesta's eyes flicked to the silk wrap of her skirt, the bare midriff above the clean bandages, the loose shawl slipping down one shoulder. Why else get all dressed up like that if you weren't meeting someone? She tapped her chin theatrically. Half-elf with the stormy eyes, maybe? Izzi's flush deepened to crimson. I'm going to bed, she muttered, trying to step around the counter before the woman's grin swallowed her whole. Of course you are, Hesta teased, trailing her voice after Izzi like a cat pawing a mouse. But sooner or later, you'll tell me everything. Izzi fled up the stairs, shawl slipping further, her heart thumping louder than her ribs allowed. Behind the counter, Hesta leaned back, still smiling, and shook her head. Sooner or later, she repeated to the empty room, before returning to her ledger.
Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe. More chapters are on the way.